here. I'm sure we'll have more folks trickling in throughout the evening, but my name's Alexis Miller. I'm the Director of Community Impact at Solar United Neighbors. Just want to welcome everyone here tonight. And I'm so sorry for my voice. I am a little bit under the weather. So if at any point someone can't understand me or I have to take a mute to cough or get a drink, I apologize. I'm grateful for our Zoom capabilities so that we didn't have to cancel tonight because I wouldn't want to get others sick. So with that, we'll get started. Continue, please, to drop into the chat your name and where you're coming from. I'm seeing some more folks, California, Pennsylvania, several from Florida. So we love to see it. It looks like we've got a good spread of everyone. So to start things off, we'd really love to thank Melanie for generously sharing this film with us. We hope you've all been able to enjoy it this week. And if you haven't watched it yet, please feel free to and continue to share the link to have more folks join us. It's been really fun to see the amount of folks interested in the film. And again, we just want to thank everyone who's joining us tonight, as you are one of our VIP donors and volunteers. So thank you for spending your time and money to support Solar United Neighbors throughout the year. We truly couldn't do it without you, and we're super excited to have this special event as a thank you to our volunteers and donors, and just want you to each know how much of an impact your time and money makes on your community, the nation as a whole, and the solar movement. So thank you all for that. And with that, we'll get started on the Q&A. So looks like someone's already dropping into the Q&A, so that's great. Joanne said, send out the link again. And yes, I can send that to you. So as a reminder for folks, we'd love to have you drop in questions into the Q&A, which at your bottom bar, you can click on Q&A and put questions into there. That just helps us to keep them organized. And then if you have chatter, like sharing your introductions or want to chat with other folks on the call, keep that in the chat. Just helps us to keep things straight, as sometimes a lot of questions can come in at once. So if you have any questions about the film, for Melanie, about herself and her work that she's done, please feel free to start dropping those into the Q&A. And while those start coming in, I'm going to turn it over to Melanie. I'm sure I've said enough, and let her introduce herself, share with us her background and what got her to this point. Again, thank you so much, Melanie, for joining us and for sharing this film with us.
Thank you so much, Alexis, and thank you for inviting me. I mean, I am truly so honored to be speaking to everybody tonight. It's really exciting. I mean, obviously, I am a documentary filmmaker, and what is changing in the world of media in terms of how you can distribute a film, it's been changing anyway, and now because of the remote capacities from the last couple of years, it's so exciting that we're able to do things like this and bring films right to audiences who we know are going to care and who really want to see these stories. So it's just kind of like super exciting for me to be here tonight and be talking to you all. Let me just give you the background of the film. So I've lived in New York City for over 20 years now, but I split my time now between New York City and upstate New York. And I was starting to learn a long time ago about solar coming into New York. And I really didn't know that much about it. And I kind of went, really? Wow, that's kind of interesting. How does that work? And then I started to explore it, and I started to learn more about wind power. And I am a lifelong environmentalist who always wanted to do solar in some way and never knew how. So I went to the University of Michigan, and some of you may know this. The University of Michigan has a world-class solar car team. So way, way, way back when I was there was a friend of mine who was in like the engineering program, and he worked on the solar car team. And I remember running into him one day, and he was like, we have this solar car team. And I thought, this is incredible. And like, it took like 20 years later for me to be in New York City and somebody talking about solar again, for it to feel like there was that close enough where I could walk up and see it. Like, it's always been something I've been interested in that felt so, so, so far away. So when you're a documentary filmmaker, there's not a ton of perks to the job, but one of them is that if you have a sort of unusual interest, it is literally like a license to go chase down that interest. And so I did that, and I started talking to people, and one thing led to another, one location led to another. I actually started filming with a wind power site because my first act was type into a search bar, what's the closest wind farm to New York City? And it was in Atlantic City, and there's a wastewater treatment center. I mean, if you saw the film already, you know it's there. And they have devoted themselves to being 100% renewable energy. It's a really incredible, like, industrial site. So that's actually where it started. They also have a solar carport, and it's, you know, it's just one of these things where when you see it, you're like, why isn't every industrial site doing this? This makes so much sense. And I'm not a person with a science or technology background necessarily, but it was also a lot easier to understand the technology of solar and wind when I saw it together in a place. And I just started going with it. So I went from Atlantic City to New York City to Detroit, and, you know, sort of, and Puerto Rico after that. Well, it was actually Las Vegas, and then Puerto Rico, and then Vermont. And then I said, wow, this is like a lot of locations, way too many maybe, but really not. Because as I started to see all these different locations and what they were doing in different locations, and it would, you know, each one was slightly different. Some were utility scale, some were very small scale, solar powered streetlights. You know, in Puerto Rico, it was like restoration of power after the hurricane. And I can't even say which name because it's like kind of like all of the hurricanes, right? It was her. I went there and filmed after Hurricane Maria, but there's been so many since. And it was like, I could see all of these different uses and ways of using energy. And then I would ask people in different locations, you know, do you know about this project in Atlantic City? Do you know about this project in Detroit? Do you know about this? And they were like, no. And I realized there's not, it's new and everyone's kind of working in their own community. And I saw this sort of opportunity to make a visual movable object, which is what a film is, that's kind of a big bird's eye view. And so that's what I really aim to do, you know. And I had a couple of different kind of overarching like things I was going for, which is showing how firsthand how people were using it, not demo projects, not like some tests, like actually being used for someone's actual electricity. And then I set this sort of no villains, no victim is what I call it, the sort of narrative, which turned in later to something else, a different language to describe it. But I also realized I was doing my research and I was like, everything is either about business and investing, or it's about policy, or it's about who's bad or what's wrong. And there's nothing saying just like how, like where can you find out how this actually works, right? So I just said, I want to show how it works. I want to see how it works and not judge the material or judge the people who are using it, but just show it. So those are my two kind of like overall concepts. And it turned into this whole documentary and a book and a whole bunch of other stuff.
Thanks, Melanie. Appreciate you sharing more about that. I'd love to hear a little bit more about what drew you to those locations specifically and how you kind of landed on those. You touched a little bit, but I'd love to hear more.
Yeah, I wish I could say it was a really like scientific, clear, methodical process. It was, again, for the first one, Atlantic City was the closest to New York City. And I learned so much technically just talking to them. Rick Dovey, who is the general manager there, I felt like I got like a crash course and not a lengthy one. It was like, oh my gosh, look at these, how it works. And I also saw, it's kind of interesting. Remember, I did say it was a wastewater treatment center and it smells like it. And the first time I filmed there was on a tour. And I'm being, you know, just kind of observing this. And I'm like, people are bringing their kids. And I have to ask, I'm filming. I have to ask everybody where they're from. Can you sign this permission? Can I use you in this film? So they're telling me there were people from Sweden. This is Atlantic City. People drove up from Philly, which is, it's not super far, but it's not like right there. You know, it's not like everybody came from across the street. People were driving, bringing their kids there. And it's to see a wind farm. And so you hear all this, like, you know, I feel like the reactions to wind, the negative reactions to wind power get a lot more press than the positive reactions. It's just my opinion, but I never, you know, I just was really surprised at people doing that. So I kind of started with Atlantic City and it was a very technical kind of, this is how it works. I added New York City because that's where I live. And I was starting to learn about community solar being put in here, which is, you know, rooftops that are of warehouses are being turned. And I use this, you know, rooftops of warehouses can be obviously very great for solar because there's no trees around it, et cetera. The lines are all there. So there's quite a few of these. I filmed with one organization. When I approached them, when I talked with them, they had 4 sites. I checked a couple years ago and they had like 40. Okay, so it really expanded. So I had that, but I also connected with a city council member here who was the head of the environmental committee. And he was leading all of this legislation to convert America's largest city into, he's proposed and had bills passed that have, that are things like you would be so surprised, like having no fossil fuel production anywhere within New York City limits. And, he led for like wind power and geothermal bills to make these easier to do. He led for solar. He led a bill called Renewable Rikers. He led New York City's Green New Deal. Obviously, he doesn't pass all of these himself, but so anyway, I connected with him and I thought, okay, now I have industry and now I have policy. And this was, and a lot of cities were making commitments to 100% renewable energy. And right around the time that I was kind of finding these, these Atlantic City and New York City stories, there was a media cycle for Las Vegas hitting 100% renewable energy for all of its city services. I read all the clean energy media, and this was a lot. And I thought this is a kind of an interesting one because a lot of cities are making this commitment. Here's the biggest city. I don't know if it was the first in the country. It was not the first, but it was the first large city. Las Vegas is massive, and especially in terms of the number of tourists that come there. Las Vegas and doing that research led to finding Detroit as well, which I grew up in Michigan. So I was very excited to see Detroit kind of taking some step towards solar. And I found a wonderful story there so now I had industry, policy, and another city hitting this goal. And I thought I need some small projects. I need something more relatable. So then I found Highland Park after I just started looking for solar in Detroit. When I was filming in Las Vegas was actually when Hurricane Maria happened. I was standing there with utility executives from NV Energy when we all got like these news alerts on our phone. And I remember asking them about how did the whole island lose power? And the second I got back to New York City, I said, I have to go to Puerto Rico. And I just started looking for people rebuilding with solar. I said, there's definitely going to be people rebuilding with solar. So that led to that. And so I was just sort of adding to the different varieties of things and the different problems that were trying to be solved. And then finally, I connected with somebody. I teach at Pace University in New York, and there's a Pace University Energy and Climate Loss Center. And I connected with somebody there, Carl Rabago, who had a wonderful conversation with me. I said, help me out. What do you think I'm missing? Tell me a little bit about this field. You know so much about it. And he said, if you want to talk to utilities, you should go talk to Green Mountain Power. And I looked them up, and that was it. I needed the innovative utility. It kind of felt like a bunch of different stories that spoke to a bigger theme. And not to neglect also that in Atlantic City, there was a group called Fisherman's Energy that were trying to start. If they had been successful, they would have built America's first offshore wind farm. Ultimately, they were not successful, but there's still only 2 offshore wind farms in the US at this point. So, yeah. So that's a long answer to your question. It was a long production process.
Totally. Yeah. How long did it take you to complete this? And I want to say you said you completed before the pandemic. Is that right?
Yeah, all of the production was actually done by 2019. So it's a very, very long process. I actually started like 10 years ago, believe it or not. But when you make a documentary film, nobody ever does it full time. So, I started filming, played around with ideas, found people. The vast majority of the filming was done in 2017 and 2018. Then 2019, it was supposed to be released. The pandemic happened. I had a lot of personal things that caused delays. Delay. Here we are, 2023. I will just say, it's very funny when people find out how long it actually takes to make films. You're just like shocked at like, oh my gosh, someone spent a decade on something. But the film Everything Everywhere All at Once, if you watch the Oscars, that film took 12 years. So I feel like I did it faster.
You're quick. Yeah.
I am faster. So yeah.
Yeah, you've got the skills. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Well, you may or may not have these answers, but since that, do you have any updates on any of the projects that you could share? Totally fine if you don't have for everywhere, but just curious what you've heard.
Yeah. City of Las Vegas is still 100% renewable I'm going to try to go through my list. Still there. And I believe they have ushered in a lot of other, and they mentioned this when I was filming, a lot of other sustainability measures in terms of water and pollution reduction and things like that. In Puerto Rico, there have been a lot of advances with solar. And in terms of where I left off with filming, there was a group in Isabella that had formed a solar installer training program, and it was residential. And they had, obviously COVID, they had to close down. So I don't know where the plans are for restarting that, but they did have 2 cohorts of students go through that, and they were dedicated to it being 50% women in those cohorts. So, and the goal and the goal was to start to have this program be NABCEP certified. And so I can say that in this audience, you guys will be like, yeah, I know, I don't have to explain it. NABCEP certified for island residents who wanted to stay on the island. So again, I'm not 100% sure what their plans are, but they certainly created a model training program, right? So that was the Isabella. In Salinas, they also started their community solar program, and they were working with a community college. Again, when I stopped filming, they're working with a community college to also set up a solar installer training program. Going through my list here, in Detroit, Highland Park, Detroit, Michigan, inside Metro Detroit, they started as a couple of people meeting in a coffee shop because they didn't even have an office, and they did a crowdfunding campaign to build their first solar powered streetlight. And they are now an organization that has had national press. They've been featured on the Today Show, all through other types of national media, built themselves up as an organization, have submitted enough comments, ratepayer comments, that they actually had a judge agree with them, not just them, with other Michigan renewable energy nonprofits, and had the judge send the rate plan back to the Detroit utility and say, nope, you've got to make it better for renewable energy. And they started they have a goal to raise $10 million to replace, this was a storyline about over 1,000 regular streetlights being repossessed by the utility, and they replaced them with solar powered streetlights. So their goal is to raise $10 million now to replace them all of those 1,000. So they are an incredible organization who really demonstrate that kind of community engagement and just building step by step by step. I have a lot of other updates. I will say Renewable Rikers, which is kind of where the New York City storyline ends up, that was passed into law. It is law in New York City, and they are starting. So I can, if anyone's interested in like legal details, I can tell you where to find them. It's a long process. Rikers prison, the jail on Rikers Island, has to be shut down. And the year for that is, I want to say 2026 or maybe 2027, but I think it's 2026. So it's not that far away. And piece by piece, there are different pieces, and that has to shut down actually, but it's not yet. Then there's pieces of the different like infrastructure and buildings that get turned over to the city. It's, you know, very kind of bureaucratic process. And I believe that last time I spoke with Costa, he said there've been a couple that have already been turned over. It's in the very beginning steps of that. And of course, you know, it's New York, and the real estate lobby here is super strong. And they've kind of, I think there was some kind of a lawsuit to try to stop it. I don't think it was very successful, because by everything I've heard about Renewable Rikers, it's step by step, taking the baby steps going forward. And Green Mountain Power is still America's most innovative utility. And I think they were recognized by Time as one of the most innovative companies, not just utilities, but companies. So, yeah.
That's amazing. And I'm impressed you had all the projects in your head ready to update. So thanks so much.
It's a lot to keep track of.
Totally.
So I hope I got all of those updates correct.
No, that was great. We had a question come in from Fred that says, what news have you come across since filming regarding the opportunity for utility scale batteries to get us closer to 100% renewable energy?
What laws have I come across? I'm not 100% sure I could answer that question, because again, I'm not a legal expert. I was more focusing on the personal stories. I think with utility scale batteries, what I can tell you is Green Mountain Power had them. There's a shot of them in the film. You know, it's like not a super exciting shot, except to someone like the people in this group who are like, oh my gosh, utility scale battery, that's so great. I know the ACUA had a utility scale battery. They do all like demo testing projects. So, you know, one of the issues with them in New York that I've heard, not for the utility scale, but smaller batteries too, is they're flammable. So you can't, well, they're not just flammable, they have the potential to burst into flames, right? We can't have that in a crowded place with a lot of co-ops and apartment buildings. So using batteries, it even is an issue with e-bikes here too. People are looking at e-bike policies because they get these off-market batteries and there've been fires. But I can't really speak to sort of the bigger legislative picture about utility scale batteries. I wish I could.
No, that's helpful. And Fred, I'll drop in our help desk information as well, which you probably talked to. Your name is familiar to me, so I think we've been on other webinars together. But you can feel free to reach out to them, and one of our Go Solar experts, I'm sure, would be happy to chat with you more about that. I'm on a similar vein of utilities. And Melanie, feel free to answer this, or I'm happy to add color from our perspective as well. We got a question that says, what is the attitude of utilities towards renewables generally? It sounds like their utility tends to be lukewarm,
Yeah.
but it seems like a lot go downhill from there.
Yeah, that's okay. So I want to go back to answer this. I want to try to go back to my no villains, no victims, why I started out with that, right? I'm gonna say I filmed at two utilities, okay? NV Energy in Nevada and Green Mountain Power. I am gonna say I contacted other utilities. I'm not gonna say who. I will say NV Energy and Green Mountain Power were so wonderful in terms of responding to me, being open to being in somebody's documentary film and sharing information. NV Energy got me onto like an Air Force base to film, and their sites, they were so generous with their time. The same with Green Mountain Power, really just shared what they were trying to do. Not all utilities responded that way. So I think when you're a filmmaker, you have an opportunity to just say, okay, these are not industries. These are characters. These are individuals. These are people. And I was able to see that it depends on who the person is and who the company is and what the company culture is. And if you've already watched the film, you know this. When you watch it, if you haven't watched it yet, Mary Powell talks about Green Mountain Power. She focused on culture. She focused on company culture and being responsive. So that idea about what is all of the utilities' attitude in Michigan, DTE, that is the utility that repossesses streetlights. Let's just say I don't think they had a great attitude towards renewables. It's not what we call exemplary. There are utilities that are leading, and there are utilities that are dragging their heels. And I know when I started filming, like I did a lot of research, and I know that there were a lot of technical issues at a certain point where it was just, the electricity is meant to come out of the wires to the house. It's not meant to go back and forth. And I won't even use the technical terminology. I know you guys know it. But it's kind of like you can't put water up the tap, right? It just doesn't work that way. And a lot of utilities solve that. So I was kind of following this line of that. And then it was like a whole bunch of utilities seemed to be like, nah, it's not a problem anymore. And they solved it. So technically there are utilities who are still resisting, I think for that very reason, but they don't really have a reason to resist anymore. Do you know what I mean? It's like any industry has its best practices. And if you don't yet know how to do a thing, whatever it happens to be that's relevant for your industry, you can go to a conference, you can learn, you can read a book, you can hire somebody, there's ways to find out. So I think it's very market by market, for utilities, I guess. Yeah.
Definitely, yeah. And to jump on that, I would agree with what Melanie said. And for those of you who are familiar with our work as we run co-ops and help folks to go solar throughout the nation, have a lot of experience working with various utilities, and to a similar point, have just like it can be varying across the scale of what that looks like. But as an organization are trying to help folks. So if you're in an area that is having trouble, please make sure if you're not already connected with our state teams to connect. And we're happy to help you with trying to make sure there are solar friendly policies and ways to make sure your utility is working with you as friendly as possible. There's some things we can't get around, but we do try to help folks make it as easy to go solar as possible. So feel free to reach out if you're not already connected. Yeah.
Can I add on to that? I want to
Please.
add something to that. Okay, so in my experience working on this film, the most notorious utility was PREPA in Puerto Rico. The one where just literally everybody, I talked to solar developers who were not activists trying to change the system. They were people who had built solar and were just like, they're so difficult to work with. And these are people with a lot of money from, they're not even, don't even think they live in Puerto Rico, right? Who are more like investors, and they were just as frustrated as everybody else trying to, because they had solar farms that after Hurricane Maria were operational. And I asked them, at that point, I was still really trying to understand the whole system. I said, is it kind of like you have a herd of cows and they are producing milk every single day, but the trucks are not coming, and so the milk can't go to people? And they were like, that's pretty much it. That's pretty much it. So that's PREPA being a super, just call them challenging. And at the end of the film, I'm going to give away the end here. There's a proposal in Puerto Rico called Queremos Sol, which is we want solar. And it was a coalition wide of people on the island, entities, universities, stakeholders, different groups like that, as well as just individuals who've been very, working for this for years. And they put together this proposal. And one of those groups was the Union of PREPA Workers. So again, when you talk about the utilities, the big general word, right? There are the people who run it, and then there are people who work in it too. And the utility workers at PREPA wanted to do solar. So just to consider that, it can be very hard sometimes, I think, to get out of the generalizations and just look at it as people doing things, because it's a big company, right? But that is, I guess, where I had that advantage, because that's what you do in a film, is you think about it in the human terms.
I love that. And I think that's a great way to put it, as well as your previous point to not make anyone the villain, I think is a great way to put it, and how we try to angle things as well to make sure we're neutral and including everyone in the future. So thank you so much for that. A quick answer to Fred asked another question. Melanie, feel free to add anything, but I'm going to add from Solar United Neighbors that Fred asked about the future of home batteries as a way to enhance home solar through virtual power plants. And so if you know about virtual power plants, you're welcome to add, but I'm going to say, Fred, I dropped in our help desk information. If you want to reach out there, we actually have a group of volunteers that meets with some of our staff members that are interested in talking about virtual power plants. They meet once a month. And so if you're interested in learning more about that and talking more about that topic, you're welcome to join that group. They're more focused on that. That's a very technical thing to dive into. So I don't want to chat about it if you don't want to.
No, I think I want to join that group, because I guess I found my inner nerd with this. I love talking about stuff like this. So again, the future of home batteries is a big question. It depends on the market. It depends on the home. We couldn't do something here in a New York City, co-op building because of fires. You can do something in the suburbs. But I encourage you to look at Green Mountain Power again, because when I talk to people, I ended up focusing on one specific storyline for each place. So in Vermont, I got less into the technicalities of what they did and more into the culture. But they had a program that first they piloted Tesla batteries. I mean, they brought them to people's homes, but they also had this program where if you had an electric car and you plugged it into your house, those cars became the backup system, not just for the house. I believe it was for the grid in general. I'd have to read up more on that, but it was an incredible rethinking of what the grid is, and is it necessary for someone, if they have an electric car, is it also necessary for them to have a battery on their house? Maybe they do, but I think to me, that revealed this edge of innovation where sometimes what is trying to, be done, I guess, is to take the thing out that's not working, pluck out the fossil fuels and stick in the solar. And sometimes that's not what's needed. It's like a complete redesign in some cases where it's relevant. So as you're saying, the virtual power plants, that's something I'm very interested in learning more about, just for my own personal, what can I do? In New York City, we're talking about how can we have a whole bunch of co-op buildings joined together to do solar or heat pumps that makes it more economical, because the construction can be horrible, and the permitting, it's just really tedious and hard and lengthy. And when you're doing it in one building that's 100 apartments, why not do in the other building next door that's also 100 apartments? So looking for ways to create those kind of redesigns of the way we do things is, I think, something that I didn't expect to find that was super interesting.
Definitely. Thank you so much for sharing. And I saw a comment in the chat too about bidirectional charging, as you're mentioning, of being able to use your car battery as a charger to go to your house, and then your house can also charge your car. So we definitely have also been talking about that, and we're hoping to have an EV webinar coming up in a couple of months to chat more about that. And I'll give a plug for, we just last month had a battery storage webinar that I'll share with all the RSVPs of this webinar, so that folks can learn more about battery storage and the different ways that you can use that in your home as well. We have a question from Eric that said, why did the Highland Park utility take down the street lights, and how did they react when the lights were installed with solar?
Oh, why did the Highland Park utility repossess somewhere between 1,100 and 1,400 streetlights? I see two different numbers all the time. This is like almost like a philosophical question. Capitalism. Highland Park, Michigan has a very long and almost glorious history because it was the site where the Ford Motor Company started. So at one point, it was like the third richest city in the entire country. It was probably like the 1920s, 1930s, right? It's not now. Declined, just like Detroit and, kind of other communities that you can kind of loosely call like Rust Belt, or, really dealing with sort of changing of manufacturing jobs. And so Highland Park had a lot of economic issues. And when the Ford Motor Company and Chrysler was there and other companies, they left. So when they left and took their corporate headquarters out, all of the people that had the money, and that made it this rich community, they went with it. Loss of tax base, et cetera, et cetera. They had a lot of financial issues. And so the city itself was in arrears on its electric bills, like $4 million in arrears. And so part of this settlement was to repossess the streetlights. So some of the first reactions to it were like going to the city council and like, what happened, and there's a lot more to be said about it. So again, if you watch the film, or if you already have, there's a wonderful, amazing journalist named Paul Lee, and he lived in Highland Park. He grew up there, and he filmed it. It was somebody was repossessing a streetlight in front of his house, and he filmed it. And he was like, why were there no notices? Why wasn't anyone even so much as notified? So they had a process with the city council, the community did, in terms of how did they react. So when Solidarity, the reaction for DTE as a utility, I think Solidarity has had some conversations with them. I don't think that there's a lot of collaborations that have resulted from that. Solidarity went more to going to the city council to propose that the city council reinstall all of the streetlights using solar, but kind of like the rest of Detroit, water access is an issue and the cost of water. And so that was just a higher priority. So the city council really never carried that forward very much. But there's a lot of collaboration between Solidarity and the city park, the Highland Park City Council. So I don't know that there's a lot of negative actions that DTE took per se, but I think the people in Highland Park just felt like we don't need them to fix our problem. We want to fix it ourselves, and we want it to be something that you can't just like take away because somebody else somewhere else had a managerial problem or an administrative issue, didn't pay the bills, and now everybody else has to suffer from that. So yeah.
Thank you so much for adding that. Another question is, during the intro to the film, you mentioned that nobody thought there'd be interest in a positive film about renewable energy. I'm curious why you thought that would be the case.
It's not that I thought that. I was told that. I pitched this to people, and I pitched this to some different film organizations, and they're, the grid, you're talking about utilities, who cares? And then you'd go to some who are interested in science, and they're like, ooh, that's really interesting. So I guess we have to find the science nerds sometimes. I think that what really resonated though was, so I mentioned that I had the no villains, no victims, and that sort of morphed into, it's a narrative structure, right? It's just how I was approaching it. And then I found the Solutions Journalism Network, which is a very similar way of thinking. They just use different language. And I started to take like their trainings and read their materials. And so they are a group of journalists. It started with a few journalists from the New York Times who wanted to write about solutions. And they've created a whole structure and a whole like pedagogy around how you teach journalists to write about solutions rather than problems, especially when those problems have been really widely covered. So I started to adopt some of their, their sort of like approaches, like talk about the solution, you talk about the limitations of the solution. It's not like a fluffy story, but it's like, solar powered streetlights solve some problems. They don't solve everything, but they also do things you didn't necessarily expect. So there are people in places who are interested in this story. I have, let's see, I have talked to a few distributors and they were interested, some in Europe who are also interested in finding out more. When now I have like it's finally coming out. I'm finally able to show it to people. So we'll see now. We'll test my idea that, solutions journalism is what is going to really resonate with people, and that there are maybe people now who want to see this even more. And I think also the last year and what's happening with Ukraine and fossil fuels and the fossil fuel economy is, it makes it timely in a way that it wasn't even before.
Definitely. And someone mentioned in the chat about the IRA and the new legislation that has been passed. That also makes it an exciting time because it's really like a boom of opportunity for more folks to go solar, which we are super excited about. Sue just asked a great question that she said, I love the film. So what's next? How do we get people around our neighborhood to watch it? And what are your other, next steps from there?
Oh my gosh, I love this question because I could almost ask it back to you. So where do you watch movies? We are all in this era now where anyone can create a virtual event. So it's very exciting because documentaries have had to compete with, the Hunger Games and whatever Marvel is doing for what we call films, right? Except what I do and what Marvel is doing, we're not even close to the same thing. So what's next now is I'm starting to plan screenings like this one, with different organizations. I think for the next few months, it's going to focus on the communities where I did the filming, and really launch into like more screenings like this, private screening, sneak previews. I've sent it to a few festivals. I'm going to go back to all those distributors and see what they see what they want to do now, if they're interested still, see where we can go with it, and just really start that process. And I'll probably be looking at national broadcast sometime starting next year. You shop it around for a while, you do it, a national broadcast, you see where you can get it. At some point there will be like a kind of video on demand version, but that probably won't be right away, so that's why I do the sneak preview screenings, because we can just go really fast to groups such as this one who are going to be really interested in this story. So I would love if you know anybody or you hear of an organization who would want to screen this in your community, just contact me. You can go to our website, you can reach out. Alexis is free to share my information with anyone. We're really trying to get it out to places where, they want to hear about this.
Thanks, Melanie. I'll be sure to include that information in our follow-up that we'll send to all the RSVPs from this event so that you have that easily accessible and can feel free to reach out. On like a bigger scale, I'd love to hear like what's your future of your work and like your passions, and where do you see things going from here?
Yeah, wow, thank you. I think the next year to 2 years is getting this film out, and that's really going to be exciting. I actually am also a college professor. I have like 2 jobs basically. So as a professor, it's kind of fun to take what I do and turn it into teaching, kind of, think about like teaching tools and pedagogy. So I'm actually going to write a book about post-production and documentary editing. So yeah, and those are my projects. Those are 2 both big ones. And I have a few other ideas for next documentaries and what I want to do, but right now I'm going to let them stay at the seedling stage until we can get some producers and partnerships to make them bigger.
That makes sense. That sounds like enough to fill your time for the next little while. Well, looking back on the film, do you have anything you would do differently? Any other areas you would have highlighted or wanted to look into, or any other like reflections after it's been some time since the film was finished?
Ooh, wow. I am sure there are other places. I remember at some point saying, I can't add any more locations. And I would talk to people and say, you have to go here and you have to go here. And I really wish I could go to all the places. I'm sure there's things I wish I had done differently, sometimes just technical things where I'm like, why did I point the camera this way? I wish I filmed it that way. But overall, I just, I feel like it's such a growing yet isolated kind of field of being able to do this on your own home, in your own space, in your own community. Some people are just working with small scale and some people are working on a big scale. And it was just very exciting to be able to go talk to all these different people and put this together as a big overview. So every filmmaker I know sees the film when it comes out and is like, why didn't I do? And there's like a list of like 100 things, but you can also, I also am kind of going, oh my God, look at this. And the unfortunate part, the part that really sort of bothers me is so much of the problems people are having are still relevant. It's not like I filmed some of these things 10 years ago and now it's old news and it's totally irrelevant. It's actually not. I mean, Hurricane Maria was 5 years ago and I look at that footage and it's so I could have filmed it last week, right? The problems are still the same in a lot of places. So the more, education and talking about solar and how you can do it on your own, or wind power or EVs or whatever you need, the switching to renewable energy, the more we can have community conversations, the better.
Definitely, we wholeheartedly agree with that, and with bringing opportunities to communities in any way that we can, whatever that looks like, and whatever is the best fit for that specific community and family. However, we can all work together to, make a more sustainable future is what we're looking for as well. We did get some suggestions in the chat, just in case you haven't seen it, of where you should submit the film to. The Traverse City Film Festival, John suggested, so giving you a tip there for future reference.
Forest Film
um,
Festival, yeah.
yeah, does anyone else have any questions for Melanie before we wrap up? I'll give folks a couple 30 seconds or so to drop any more into the Q&A or into the chat before we wrap up.
Now you mentioned the chat, so now I'm reading the
Oh,
chat. I
yeah,
told
feel free.
Alexis, as a college professor, I only talk or read the chat. I never do them both at the same time.
I told her it can be a lot to keep up with.
Yeah, yeah, I have heard of Power Block. To the person who said battery backup solar in an electric car, I also have a plug-in hybrid car, so it's partially electric. And at our place upstate, we're on community solar. So technically I have a solar powered car. You can kind of make that argument. And sometimes when people talk about EVs are starting to be something we really need to talk about too, in the batteries. And the thing that people don't talk about is how the cars charge themselves. It's the thing we got the most excited about. I was in a traffic jam on the West Side Highway once. I had zero battery because I've been driving for like an hour. And I was in this traffic jam for like 30 minutes. It put 5 miles on my battery. I was like, let's like totally reframe a traffic jam to be a positive experience. It was amazing.
That's
And like,
hilarious.
it wasn't, and I was like, this is so great. I can be, it's the braking. When we're upstate New York, it's also when you go downhill, we come out at the bottom of the hill and our battery has more miles on it. A lot of what you do in filmmaking and media is try to shift narratives, right? And sometimes we get caught up in these narratives that are really like in a rut, and EVs, I feel like there's so many more things to say about them. And there's a lot coming out about the mining for the batteries. And definitely that's important, but also you can have a car that's plugged into a grid that's powered by solar, and we have solar powered cars.
It's amazing. You got a question on when was the last time you filled up your gas tank?
Unfortunately, it was today. It's like once a month or so. But I will tell you, last year when Putin invaded, I had filled the tank and then he invaded Ukraine. And I was like, I am going to go as long as I can without putting gas in this tank. And I was able to go 2 months, 2 straight months. And I commute 3 days a week. This was commuting 3 days a week, 30 miles, 60 miles, 30 miles each way, because I was able to find a plug at my university and plug in. So a fairly normal amount of driving. I mean, it wasn't like driving very far for 5 days a week, but it was 3 days a week. And I did that 2 months. So it's like a goal. I get into little games with myself. How far can I go? Where can I plug in? Do I really need to do that extra 2 miles? So
That's
yeah.
so funny. Yeah, I've heard having an EV and also having solar similarly, where you can like track and see what your production is, that people call it a little game for them. Um, the this is a question from Fred, and he asked if you have any thoughts on Planet of the Humans and how is such a hit job on solar with misinformation. I have not seen that, so I'm not sure if you have.
I watched about 1 minute of it, and I'd heard all the bad stuff, and I watched 1 minute and went, I don't need to spend my time on this. I don't know if I have any. The only thought I have is that I haven't thought about it since it came out, which was like 8 years ago or something. I don't remember when. Yeah, you know what I can say about that is energy is so polarized. It's so polarized as a discussion, and I think one thing that I saw was how there are a lot of people, probably all present company included, who actually love to talk about energy. We all have little inner engineers, or maybe you're an outer engineer and you're an actual engineer, but it's not something I think the general public is still kind of like, energy, let the utility take care of it, let the, and they're not sort of caught up in it. And sometimes I think about like how much we know about food and our food systems, and like, the everything from what's in it to how organic to how local to the high fructose corn syrup to the real sugar to the, just when I was growing up, people did not know that much about their food, right? There's a media cycle, there's an industry, there are nonprofits, there are organizations, there are people who write about it, there are activists, there are scientists, there's a whole bunch of different industries that move that forward to where we are now with like the vast amount of knowledge you can have in terms of making your food choices, right? The difference is that you can make your food choices. You can go buy from multiple places. And we are only beginning to see a few states where you actually have choices on where you can buy your energy, or choices to make, right? Which is why groups like Solar United Neighbors are so important, because you're starting to make that a little bit more obvious and visible, and bring that little crack where you can kind of pull apart that system and help people make choices.
Totally, and I love that emphasis, because that's also what we like to say, is that like um coming at solar and renewable energy from just like a non-bias, anyone is welcome here. We don't have like specific call outs due to that. We want anyone to feel welcome at our organization. And if you support solar, then this is your place to be. So sounds like we're very similarly aligned on that. um Brent asked a question that is in line with this, of he loves your idea of avoiding having villains. What was the organization that you mentioned that you resonated with?
What was the organization I mentioned that I resonated with? The
Yeah,
Solutions Journalism Network? Is that what you mean? I'm not sure with
Brent
the
said, oh, he said yes, so you got
Solutions
it.
Journalism Network. Yeah. Yeah, look them up. They have a great website. They have a story tracker of solution stories. They're wonderful.
Awesome. Thank you so much. It looks like we have made it through the questions. Someone else just is adding their thoughts to of going 2 months without filling up. And
It should be like an e-sport or something,
yeah, we
right?
need like a leaderboard here.
How long can you go? Like I'm
Yes.
in New York State. I'm very fortunate. New York State has put in a lot of EV chargers. Even New York City has put them in. But I'm not going to stop on 87 when I'm driving upstate and sit for 2 hours. I'm just not, there's not that much to do at we still have to find them at places where you're going to go shopping and stuff, but we're seeing a lot more of them here. And yeah, I think finding ways to make it more fun, I guess, in a way, and make it more built into the rest of life too, but like make these fun social exchanges where we're sharing, like, how long can you go without a fill up? Did you make it for 3 months? Did you make it to 6 months? Like, I'd love to challenge myself to go 3 months without filling up. I really would.
Well, we'll start a challenge with this group. Everyone can report back on how long we can make it and see where we land. Well, it's been so fun, and what a fun crowd. That I love that everyone's able to like relate to all the similar issues here. I think we are good to wrap up, folks. So I want to give another shout out. Melanie, thank you so much for sharing your time tonight, as well as the film. We really have enjoyed it, and as you can tell, resonates well with our folks. So glad we could be able to share it with our network. And thank you so much, everyone who joined tonight. Thank you again for all your support of Solar United Neighbors. And I will follow up with an email with more information about Melanie and her work and how you can continue to support her as well. With that, I hope everyone has a great evening and a great rest of your week, and happy Earth Day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Melanie. Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.